In this video, we will take a look at a simple yet very powerful flow that is used to monitor any number of data sources. It is built around the data trigger module that we see in the middle of this flow. This is a module that can monitor values coming from different data sources and check whether the values meet certain conditions that we have defined. So the core configuration of this module is a list of triggers that we have defined, and a trigger can consist of one or several conditions where we check the data coming from the data sources. So we can check whether a value is above a threshold, or if a string contains a certain text, or if a Boolean value is true or false, and so forth. And the trigger can have any number of conditions, so we can check multiple data sources. We can check whether a sensor value is above a threshold and at the same time as some other value has turned true or false. We can also do basic arithmetic operations between data sources, so we can check whether the difference from two temperature sensors is above some threshold, things like that. So a lot of different conditions can be checked, and we can also, in addition to checking the actual values, we can also check that they are true, or these conditions are true for a certain time, so that we don't fire triggers based on intermittent values. So we can say that we just want to fire a trigger when this condition has been met for a certain amount of time. So lots of flexibilities in defining triggers, and we can have thousands of triggers being defined in this single module, so it can monitor a large number of data sources. In this example, we have used an OPC input and an MQTT input as examples of data sources, but data could come from anywhere by just using other modules from our library. So that could be from a database or from an API call, from PLCs and so forth. So lots of different options there for creating or getting access to the data that we want to monitor. The only requirement is that all the data that hits the trigger module follows the same naming pattern, so the trigger module can find the data that we want to use for these conditions. And that's why we have added a renaming stage here after each input to align the naming of data that comes in, because data coming through these two different sources will typically have different structure of the data and naming conventions being used. So we harmonize the data as the first step, and then we just feed the data into the trigger module. And whenever this module receives new data, it will check it against all the triggers that we have defined. And whenever all the conditions that we have set up on one of these triggers have been met, then there will be an output from this module for that specific trigger. So there will be a reference to which of the triggers it was that fired. But we can also, when we define triggers, add any metadata with that trigger definition. And that metadata will then be part of the message that comes out of the module whenever that trigger fires. And in this example, we use that metadata to specify which work order we want to create in the SAP system, which is the final output of this example. So whenever a trigger fires saying that something has happened that we want to be notified about, we will get a message coming out here, which includes the work order number that we need to send to SAP. And then we use that in this module to build the specific message that is required by the SAP system. And there we include the work order number we got from the trigger message. And then finally, we will send that to the SAP system using, or by calling, a BAPI function on the SAP system. So this output module is intended to be used with SAP ECC systems, typically an on-premise system that runs locally in the local environment. If we want to send data to SAP in the cloud, then it would probably be more useful to do a REST API call, and then we would just replace this output module with an HTTP module, and we can then send data to that type of SAP system. But in this case, SAP is of course just an example. You could use the same concept to send data to any type of output system, of your choice wherever there is a need to be notified about this event that the trigger module has detected. So this is a basic example, very simple, but still very powerful. You could, of course, extend this with more advanced functionality. We could, for example, add the capabilities to check whether there is already an ongoing work order in SAP, so we don't just add another one with the same number. We could also check whether or that there has been a certain time since the last time we created the same work order, so we don't just keep adding repeated work orders and stuff like that. So that is capabilities that we could extend this example with by using other standard modules from the Crosser library. But this gives you an overview of what can be done with the data trigger module for creating work orders when some kind of condition has been detected that you want to take an action on.